My name is Carolyn Delaney. I'm the founder and CEO here at Journey Enterprises. We're a media company on a mission to make recovery from addiction visible because it's important. It saves lives. There are over 26 million of us in recovery, and we want those who are still sick and suffering to know that there's a path for them. There's millions of us here on the other side of active addiction, and that it's probable that people can and do recover. Our videos share personal, intimate stories of what people's journeys were like, going from what it was like to what happened to what it's like now, in an effort to let people know that we're here, we care, and that there's a way out. Visible recovery saves lives, and we want the world to know that. So if you have a story about recovery and would like to share it, please contact me, Carolyn at recovery-journey.com. I hope you enjoy our videos. Have a great day.
My name is Colleen Garrick, and I am an alcoholic and an addict. For me, I started drinking at age 12. I came from a broken home. Growing up, as with just my brother and my father, my mother was an alcoholic. I just felt like I didn't belong. I didn't feel like I was a part of a family. Drinking allowed me to be a part of a group of people because they were drinking too. In high school, it was, do we drink on the weekends or whatever? But for me, it was like, I always drank too much and just never really understood it. Fast forward to college, I drank, and then I started adding elixir, other things, substances to kind of allow me to drink more. And I followed the band Fish around the country, and that's a big drug scene. And, in those moments, I felt like I belonged to something. I kind of ran away from college and ran back home just because of those feelings, I guess, of not being good enough, not feeling connected again. So I moved back to Massachusetts, and I continued drinking the way I'm drinking, and I get into more trouble. And then I moved to Boston. And living in Boston, I don't have to drink and drive. So I'm not experiencing those consequences of getting pulled over and arrested. So I'm thinking I don't have alcoholism or addiction because I'm now not getting in trouble. Eventually, my drugging got worse and brought me to a really dark place where I was introduced to opiates. The person I was dating was an addict. He died from an overdose. And my first thought was, I can get away from this. And my second thought was, how am I going to get high? Eventually, I started selling drugs to support my habit. And on November 17th, 2009, I was living in Cambridge at the time, and I got a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and it was 10 state police and a DEA agent, and they had guns drawn and shields. And this was a time that I finally was looking at real consequences. I get arrested. They take me into Cambridge, and the whole time I'm in there, all I'm thinking about is, how am I going to get high? How am I going to get high? And a friend of mine bails me out for $5,000 and brings me back to my apartment. So it's November, I get this arrest, I'm being evicted, and my dad's like, help yourself. And I'm like, I have nowhere to go, nothing to do. And I still, at this moment, was not like, I need to be sober. It was like, I need to not be homeless. So what am I going to do to not be homeless? And I was like, all right, I guess I'll go to detox because the alternative is homeless. And so I got myself into detox, and I was there for about 7 days. And then I went to a retreat in New Hampshire where they introduced me to the steps. And I wasn't taking anything serious. I was almost going to get kicked out of this retreat in New Hampshire. And I was like, oh no, homeless again. And so I started taking it serious. And they took me through the doctor's opinion of the big book. And they said that the solution to that was the 12 steps, and that I have a spiritual malady. And that made sense. And, when they were talking about the first step and being powerless over alcohol, I still kind of didn't get that. I was like, no, I'm powerful. I can do all these things. I have all these things to show. And when they talked about that, and they talked about the fear and the insecurity and not feeling good enough and all that stuff, I was like, oh, that is me. I get that. And as soon as I was able to get that, and then kind of realize that the powerlessness was that once I start, I can't stop, I was like, okay, this is me. I'm in. And I went through the rest of the process, and they shared their stories, and I believe they'd walked a mile in my shoes. And I just was like, ew. And I didn't like that. And I didn't want to be that person anymore. And so, by going through that process, reading that inventory, taking a 6th and 7th step, I really started becoming free of that. And I remember after I said the 7th step prayer, and I'm sitting there in this church, in this back room, I felt like a whiteboard and somebody had erased everything off of it. I ended up staying at that place for almost 5 or 6 months. And eventually they were like, Colleen, you need to move to sober living in Portland, Maine. And I'm like a Boston girl. And I'm like, Portland, Maine, what are you talking about? And, I'm in court during this entire time for the drug trafficking charge. And I just keep doing the deal. And I end up becoming president of the Sober House. And, one of the guys at the Plymouth House was like, become a certified alcohol and drug counselor. And so I got my license for that. And eventually I was sentenced. I was looking at 10 years in prison for my charges, and they reduced some of them due to my recovery. Luckily, I only had to serve 2. I was full of fear and really afraid that feeling of connection was going to go, and that I was going to lose that sense of belonging. And to be honest, it did go for a little bit. And I was angry and resentful, and I wasn't doing anything with it. And I was like, I don't belong here. Like, I'm doing the right thing. And for whatever reason, something just kind of clicked one day, and I was like, stop resisting. Like, you are here and you are not going anywhere. So do God's work, I guess. I started, getting back into the AA meetings that they had there. I took some women through the steps while I was I taught yoga. I worked on the crew shoveling the town of Framingham, Massachusetts. I just kept busy, and it was probably one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had in my life. And then I finally was released a little bit early, and I got out on March 8th, 2013. I ended up staying sober for about 8 years, and I had a baby, and I got married, and my husband relapsed, and we lived in chaos, and I was back in fear. And when I live in fear, I make really bad decisions. And I ended up relapsing. And it was so sudden and quick. And the next thing you know, I have a habit. And now I'm like, how do I get out of this? And I did. I went in and I came out, and my husband was still using, and he wouldn't leave. I served him divorce papers. He still would not leave. Eventually, in May of 2019, between a job loss and just being sick and tired of being sick and tired, my family, my dad lives in Australia. My dad came home in July of 2019, and I was like, Dad, I need help. And so they took my daughter, and I went to a detox in Portland, and it was horrible. It was worse than the first detox I had back in 2009. I ended up calling a friend, and I said, I need a sponsor. Who do you suggest? And he suggested my current sponsor, Sarah. And she was really busy, and I told her my story, and she's like, all right, I'll help you. Eventually I got my daughter back in August of that year. And I still, was not on like sturdy grounds by any means, but I had my daughter back, and I ended up getting a job in November. Fast forward, I get a great job in February of 2020, and then COVID hits. And I don't lose my condo because I've now completed a modification. I can experience the bad, but there's a lot more good in my life than there is bad. And, I just remember, if I can get through, and like kind of just remembering that everything, this too shall pass. And I'm fortunate, I sponsor 4 women. They're amazing. I have my sponsors amazing. For me, my recovery kind of centers me and brings me into balance. And it's like, all right, pain is pain. We all feel pain. Love is love. We can all feel love if we're open to it.
I want to end off with, if you had sort of like any closing messages for people who either are newly in the recovery process, or wondering, like, do I have what it takes?
For me, the only reason I'm not a prisoner of my past is because of the steps. And, I feel like because I've been honest and thorough, fearless and thorough, in a moral inventory, and I make amends where I can. And the places I can't make amends, I try to change my behavior and make a living. I have to work the steps. I can't just go to meetings. I can't just help others. And I can't just work the steps. I literally need to do all three pieces, because without one of that, the triangle collapses. And, it's nothing, it's no magic. If you're sitting there wondering, can I do this? I would say, what do you have to lose? Because, and look at like the lengths we're willing to go to get high and to drink. They're enormous. And think of all the damage they do. So I would say, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, well, then give it a shot.
My name's David Smith, and I've been in long-term recovery since 1998. I'm definitely an alcoholic and an addict. So whatever you had worked for me. I heard a guy speak in a meeting once, and he said that he crushed his sister's birth control out and snorted it because he thought he might get high off it, and I was like, I could identify with that. I didn't do that, but that would be something I would do. At one time, I was a full-blown alcoholic. And I hated addicts, and what I would do is I would look at that junkie, I look at that person. And then I morphed over to, more shooting heroin and smoking cocaine. And I'm like, well, look at that drunk. Well, when I first came in too, I really didn't think I was an alcoholic. My sponsor said to me, the lie to self is most destructive, and I'll constantly tell my lies. And he goes, there's a progression. He says, we tell ourselves a lie, then we believe the lie, and then the lie becomes the truth. I was buying 4 bags of heroin, and I got arrested, and I got put in the county jail. And I'll never forget that day. Let me give you a little brief on my history of life. So I went through a very abusive childhood, with a lot of extreme physical, mental, and sexual abuse. And it was constantly on a daily basis. My mom pretty basically gave me to this guy to live with him, and he was the one who was abusing me. Years ago, it was easy to just go to the liquor store and somebody would run in and buy you a bottle if you wanted it. And I bought a pint of gin, and I went home, I chugged that whole pint of gin down. I could still taste it today. I felt like I ate a Christmas tree, and I got drunk right away. I passed out, I peed myself, I puked all over the place. And I woke up the next morning and I said, that's how I want to feel the rest of my life. And I continued to do that. And I got married when I was 17, and I joined the service, and I went in the Navy, and my alcoholism just progressed as I went overseas and I traveled the world. My first daughter was born with some birth defects. It tore the marriage apart. I was away, I couldn't be there. My alcoholism just exploded. And it got to the point where, alcohol and drugs just became a priority. I got arrested a few times, got out, got arrested, got out. Then finally, in 1985, I got arrested by the U.S. Marshals, and I went to federal prison. And I was in there for 4 years. I'm a big advocate of the 12-step recovery program. Later on, when I started working the steps and started talking about unmanageability and how my life was unmanageable, the biggest thing that clicked to me was when I got out of federal prison, I said, I can't drink. So I got a job, and it's amazing things that happen. You work, at the end of the week, you get this paycheck, and if you're not spending on alcohol and drugs, you start saving money. And then I started seeing this girl, and my thought process is, you know what? Maybe I could just have 1 or 2 drinks. I went out, and I was just gonna have a couple of drinks and go home, and I couldn't stop. Once I put the alcohol in me, I just couldn't stop. And then I just got back into drinking, and then I got back into drugs again, and got arrested again, and just the same old cycle. So finally in 1998, when I got arrested that time, and I was in the Cumberland County Jail, and then my probation officer came in, and he said, prison doesn't scare you, does it? And I said, no, it doesn't. I've been there, I'll just go do a couple years and I'll get out. And he said, you ever think about rehab? And I said, well, let's try the rehab thing, which at the time I was kind of tired of the life I was living anyways. I wanted a different life. And so I waited around, and there was a bed space that opened up at the Hope House in Bangor. It was a 28-day program, and I went up there. I really had to learn some of those basic skills, like get up in the morning and eat breakfast and do something during the day and be productive, and then maybe eat dinner and kind of go to sleep at night. And 28 days wasn't enough to do it. There was a bed space that opened up at a 9-month treatment center in Bangor called Wellspring. So I went there, and I was there probably about 3 months. And the recovery stuff started kind of kicking into me. When I left the 9-month program, I went to a 2-year program, which was kind of, today they have sober houses. They didn't really have those 20 years ago as fluently. So it was 3 people who lived in a 3-bedroom apartment. So I went there and decided to go to college. And I don't know why I picked culinary school, but I went to culinary school and did great. I graduated, top of my class. I graduated at 3.87. And I went to work at a restaurant. And within a couple of years, I was working at a brand new restaurant they were building. I was there for 10 years. And one of the things that happened to me is, I was on the beat. I was working very heavy in the 12-step fellowship. I was sponsoring a lot of people. I was working and things were getting busy. I actually competed in some cooking competitions. I won some awards, and I used to go on TV. My work became a priority. It basically became God. And I pushed everything else aside. I don't have time for meetings. I got to, progress in my career. I got to do all this stuff. And it didn't take too long. I was going to the gym and I was working out and I hurt my back. I did fine until I took the pills. So I went on pain medication, and, this was after 7 years, and I just started going right back down the road I was at. And it lasted for almost a year. And then one night, it just really exploded. I got in a fight with my wife. I said, I might as well just go drink. I want to drink too. I'm abusing this medication. And so I flushed the rest of the pills down the toilet, and I detoxed myself on my living room floor. And it took me about 5 days. I learned a lot of things from that point. And some of the major things that I learned is, one, I have to be involved in the fellowship all the time. So I need to have a home group. And the other thing I learned, I have to make my recovery a priority over everything else. I may not make a meeting here or there, but for me today, I believe, I'm coming up on 15 years, because that's when my relapse had happened. We moved down, my house sold up there, I bought a house down here. My job has worked very well. They've had 2 layoffs through COVID. I survived both of them, and I've changed my territory around, it's growing, so I'm doing great at work. And I often say that it isn't me, it's by working God in my life, is how all of this is working. So today, I don't want to give up what I have, and what do I have today? I got a great relationship with a great wife. We've been married, we're going to be married 20 years this September. Before that, I was never with somebody more than 2 or 3 years before they got sick of me. I got 12 grandkids, and I got a relationship with all of them. I got a great relationship with my son today. And I say that often, that my goal is that tomorrow I want to be a better person than I am today. And the only thing that's going to keep me there is by continuing to be an active member in a 12-step fellowship, continuing to, work with other people, work with other alcoholics, work with other addicts, and watch the spark grow in their eyes when they get to be that person that says, I don't want to do it more than I want.
My name is MaryBeth Murphy, and I live in Salem, New Hampshire. I am 55 years old. I was a gray area drinker, so I identified as somebody that sort of drank wine, like the mommy wine culture. I have 4 kids, 2 of them with special needs, and I used wine to cope with a lot of that, as well as being in a not so healthy marriage. So I kind of say that I got sober by accident because I tripped and fell and broke my ankle, and I was in a cast for 8 weeks. I finally had to face those whispers that were whispering in my ear for, I want to say, a good 10 years. Look at your drinking, you're drinking too much. The people that I was around were big drinkers, so I didn't really stand out. And it didn't affect my job in any way. It didn't affect any DUIs. I didn't have any proverbial rock bottoms. So that's sort of why I'm coming out. What it looked like for me was the shame. The shame brought it to my attention because in my head, I was thinking, how am I going to get my wine at night with crutches? And how am I going to we need to look at this. So what I did was I Googled, like everyone does, right? Am I an alcoholic and things like that? And I ended up falling upon a book called The 30-Day Sobriety Solution, which was by Dave Andrews and Jack Canfield. And every day I read a chapter and did the exercise that belonged to the chapter. And I actually haven't revisited the book since I did this almost 5 years ago, but that was the light switch I needed to get myself some momentum. I became a member of She Recovers, which is an online support group which supports a patchwork recovery and criticizes none. So whatever gets you to the recovery space is a good thing. For about 1 year and 3 months, actually, no, I'm going to take that back. For about 2 years and 3 months, I did this all on my own. And then when I found She Recovers in March of 19, that's when my world expanded and I found my tribe. This is a mother-daughter organization that started out as just holding retreats for women in recovery, to have these spaces for women to go to on their recovery journey where they could go and travel and not be surrounded by alcohol like so many other vacations are. And it ended up just mushrooming into this support space. When I walked into that space, there were 40 women in circle, and it was like coming home. And from there, you make the connections, you join the Facebook group, you make lifelong friends. I'm still really close to one of the friends I made there. I'm a nurse. So they have a special subgroup for healthcare professionals that are in recovery, which is obviously a very tricky group of people that have to worry about their licensure and their careers. I was a nurse for 33 years in the hospital setting, and I was going to say my drinking did not jump out as anything unusual. Like nurses would go out after work, have a couple drinks, go home. And I never looked like I drank more than the girl next to me. So I never jumped out as a big drinker. It never kept me from work. I never had any issues with anything with disciplinary action at work. I was a good nurse. I was really present at the bedside. But what happened for me is in 2016, I was Reiki attuned. So I don't know if you know anything about Reiki energy, but it's more of a holistic approach to health and wellness using universal life force energy. And I shifted from a bedside nurse to a holistic nurse, which brings me into that space of using alternative methods for healing. So that, of course, blended lovely with recovery, because in recovery, we're looking for alternative methods for coping that don't include substances. So it married in very nicely with what my path was doing career-wise. So right now I am a nurse entrepreneur and I have my own business. And what I'm trying to do is coach and help people that want to find other ways to calm their nervous systems so that they can manage their lives in a more holistic and wellness sort of way.
I wonder, similarly to the professional question, when you think about what home life was like, specifically around the children, while you were still drinking, and what has evolved and changed, and how has your sobriety affected them, affected your relationships with them? Again, thinking of that woman who may be looking at her own kids at home and going, I don't know if I can do this. What would you want her to know about your experience?
So when I stopped drinking, my kids ranged from, 14 to 19. Does that sound right? Yeah. Which was a very impressionable age for them to see their mother get sober. If you had asked them if they thought I had a drinking problem, I bet they would probably say they didn't notice much. I would often worry, like if they needed me in some way, like if they were at a party and they were drunk, or if they had a friend that couldn't get them home safely, I would always worry I wouldn't be sober enough to get them home. But of course, when you stop drinking, all of a sudden you can be that parent that could take care of your kids if they needed you, no matter what hour of the day it is. So that was a silver lining, that I felt very blessed that I could be there for them in that situation. And I recovered very out loud with them. I didn't keep it quiet. I used it as a teaching tool. I was very vulnerable with them. And I wanted to show them that sobriety wasn't a boring thing. So their dad is a big drinker, and to this day still is. And he normalizes it to the point where it really bothers me to think that that's the case, but it is what it is. But again, I felt like I could stand in my power and show them what the other side looks like.
What does recovery in a typical day in your life look like? So thinking about, again, that woman who's watching this, who may want to know more about what a daily practice or a daily mindset.
My morning practice is a meditation practice, and that could look like anything. And then I do a little bit of yoga, so a little bit of movement there. Or if I feel like there's some stuck energy, I'll do some dancing. So all by myself, dancing, no one sees me. I stopped caffeine, so I don't have any spikes and valleys with caffeine anymore. So I make my herbal tea. I listen to spiritual podcasts or books that are spiritual in nature. I can just say that my spirituality has grown and evolved since this. I'm trying to just treat others the way I would like to be treated and walk the walk. So I have a lot more pause before I respond. I am getting more into nature. So I walk outside a lot. I like to get to the ocean. The ocean is where my heart is the most full. And what else do? I get to bed early. I don't have that fear of missing out anymore. But pretty much my practices are, instead of looking outward, I go inward. And I feel more at home and at peace with myself more now than ever.
Is there anything sort of sitting on the back of your tongue that you're like, I just want to say it out loud?
So I want to say, mothers, teachers, caregivers, we always look outside of ourselves and take care of everybody first. That's just our knee-jerk response, and that's the way we were raised. And that I've realized through my recovery is that we've got it all backwards, that we have to take care of ourselves first, and then we can overflow and give to others. My new goal now is to go out into the healthcare, into different hospitals, healthcare settings, and help nurses, just rethink the way that they're living their life and turn more inward and taking care of themselves, finding out what they need first. And then they can be better caregivers after that.